Welcome to the Debrief from ABC News Live. I'm Aaron Katursky at ABC News headquarters in New York, where we are remembering our dear colleague, Cokie Roberts, who died this morning in Washington due to complications from breast cancer. Cokie was 75 years old, and was she ever a fixture of political journalism in this country for decades? And she came to it honestly, the child of two congressmen, Hale and Lindy Boggs, who collectively represented the people of New Orleans for almost 50 years. She grew up in the halls of Congress and made it her mission to educate all of us about how our government works, how it's supposed to work, and how to hold politicians of all stripes accountable. My colleague, ABC's Karen Travers, with a look back now on the life of Cokie Roberts.
Cokie Roberts was a fixture of Washington, known for her sharp reporting and analysis, her quick wit, grace, and kindness, notably her support of women in journalism. A role model and a mentor, Cokie encouraged women to push for a seat at the political roundtable. The daughter of longtime U.S. Representatives Hale Boggs and Lindy Boggs, Cokie grew up with a front-row seat to American political history. Her full name was Mary Martha Corinne Morrison Claiborne Roberts.
Thank you for having me, and please call me Cokie.
She considered joining the family business, but found her calling as a journalist.
It was essentially reporting and then writing very brief little stories, and I loved it.
She spent 10 years at NPR before finding her longtime home here at ABC News, first as a contributor on This Week.
What is your definition of womanizer?
Most women know it when they see it, Senator.
And later co-anchor with Sam Donaldson from 1996 to 2002.
Until next week, that's This Week.
Cokie was a key part of ABC News' political coverage for decades, interviewing presidents, politicians, and first ladies. Cokie wrote several New York Times bestsellers detailing untold and remarkable contributions of women in American history. She received countless awards and more than 30 honorary degrees. But the most important things to Cokie were her Catholic faith, her beloved New Orleans, and her family. Married to her husband Steve, also a journalist, for 53 years, Cokie was the mother of 2 and grandmother of 6. In 2002, Cokie battled breast cancer and spoke candidly about being on television while wearing a wig.
I felt, first going on the air in a wig, that I looked really goofy.
It was that honesty, that humanity that made her stand out amid the noise of politics, and why Cokie was so beloved by those of us here at ABC News and by viewers across the nation.
ABC's Karen Travers joins us live now from Washington, where we are all remembering Cokie Roberts. Karen, you interned for Cokie, didn't you?
I did. I walked into this building 19 and a half years ago and was an intern for Cokie when she and Sam Donaldson were the anchors of This Week, and I haven't left 19 years later. I like to think that Cokie was the one that hooked me in, but she made it such a special place, and she made you want to work hard for her, but it was the non-politics, non-work stuff that I think will stick out in so many people here at ABC's memories about Cokie. When you talked to her and she said hello to you, she didn't ask about your job. She didn't ask about the latest drama in politics. It was always, how's your family? How are the kids? How are things? Doing anything new in your life? She truly cared. This wasn't just lip service from Cokie. She was genuinely interested in what we had to talk about. Aaron, you're going to hear so much about her incredible career, the books she wrote, all of the presidents and political leaders that she interviewed. But there's so many great stories about Cokie behind the scenes that I hope that we can all share over the coming days. One of my favorites is when our twins were in the hospital for 3 months in 2015. So I was out of work for some time. This is during the heat of the primary season heading into the 2016 election. And Cokie was really busy, but she checked in on me every week. She brought food that she made herself to our house, dropped it off on the porch. I still have the text message from her that says, "Hey Travers, it's Cokie, the food's on your porch." She of course left 3 bottles of wine to go along with the homemade Louisiana food that she made for us, but that's what she did. You know, she cared about people and she was genuine. And the best part of that story is that there was a Google Doc where friends could sign up to give food to our family while the kids were in the hospital, and Cokie signed up on the Google Doc, and our friends were asking, is that Cokie Roberts who's on that list? I said, yeah, she's bringing over food next week.
I hope you gave back the Tupperware.
You're burning my secrets. No, Cokie, I'm so sorry. I still have 3 of your dishes in my house.
Karen, when it came to to the work, though. She was fierce, she was tough, and she was an unyielding advocate for the integrity of our profession of journalism.
She really was. And, you know, she was sharp, but she could jab you with a grin, and that she still had that soft Louisiana drawl that she didn't lose despite living in Washington for so long. And that toned down what were her sharp political, points and the probing questions that she would ask. She kept everybody on their toes, politicians and people in our business. She was also a mentor and a role model, especially for the young women here at ABC. She showed us how you can do this job, how you can fight for a part of that conversation, literally fight for a seat at the political roundtable every week, but also be a good person. You didn't have to change who you were. You didn't have to be a tough guy to get your questions answered or get your story out there. She did it with grace, and she did it with kindness.
ABC's Karen Travers with us from Washington on the passing of Cokie Roberts. She died this morning in Washington at the age of 75 due to complications from breast cancer. From 1996 to 2002, Cokie co-hosted ABC's This Week every Sunday with Sam Donaldson, who joins us now. Sam, it's really good to hear from you under these terrible circumstances, but I can only imagine how many stories you've kept about Cokie over the years.
Well, but didn't know her well, really, until she came to ABC. She joined the David Brinkley program in about 1988, I believe. We'd been going along, George Will, Sam Donaldson, and, of course, the great David Brinkley. It finally occurred to us that there was someone missing here, a woman, and we were lucky enough to find Cokie, and she was a terrific addition. Many people have talked already this morning about her knowledge of politics, her knowledge of Washington, knowledge of and how things worked here, at least worked here in the old days. And she was someone that you always had to turn to for the final word on what was happening. When she and I joined together after the passing of David Brinkley from the scene in Washington, one of the remarkable things I think is interesting. Often when people are paired, there are some jealousies and there's some competition. Maybe that's healthy. I don't know. But we didn't have it. We didn't have it. Cokie and I supported each other, and when one of us would do something well, the other would be there cheering. And when one of us didn't do it, it was usually me who didn't do something too well. Cokie. It was just a wonderful relationship. You
mean she would call out Sam Donaldson if he did something wrong?
Yes, and believe me, I would take it. There was no back talk for me with Cokie. You know, I want to bring up a couple of other things if you have the time. Aside from the political scene, Cokie was a fierce advocate for women's rights and women's recognition. And in her first book, she challenged the idea that founding fathers were what we should talk about. She said, let's talk about the founding mothers. And I said to her, I saw the book, I said, look, all right, Dolly Madison, yes, we know her. She saved something there when the British burned her, and Martha Washington. But Martha Washington was not out there in Valley Forge with George, freezing to death, trying to make a revolution. She said if Martha Washington hadn't been there, George wouldn't have been. Throughout her life, she supported women in every possible way. And I think people in our business, and particularly women in our business.
Sam, we're losing our connection with you, but it is so good. It's always good to hear your voice, even under these circumstances. As you remember, your co-anchor from ABC's This Week, Cokie Roberts. Cokie died this morning due to complications from breast cancer, 75 years old, and we're thinking of her 2 kids, her 6 grandchildren, and her husband, Steve Roberts, the former New York Times journalist, current professor at George Washington University, and Cokie's husband of 53 years. They co-authored books together. They wrote a weekly column and have been an inspiration to all of us about how to have a successful and sustainable relationship. So we do remember Cokie Roberts. And I think she would want us to get on with the news because there is a lot of it today. And so we want to begin with the attack on Saudi oil infrastructure. And it looks increasingly like Iran was responsible. We turn to the Pentagon with ABC's Louis Martinez. Louis, there does seem to be some new evidence developing pointing in the direction of Iran.
That's right, Aaron. ABC News has learned that a mostly intact cruise missile that the U.S. believes came from Iran, as well as a drone, an Iranian drone, have been found in the desert area around where those two plants were attacked over the weekend. This is, again, increasing evidence that points that Iran was behind the attack on this large facility, the world's largest oil refinery, and has pretty much impacted 5% of the world's oil supply. So the U.S. has this evidence. We talked recently to other U.S. officials who say that the U.S. is working to declassify what intelligence it has that further points to Iran being behind this attack. U.S. officials telling us that the U.S. intelligence is pretty certain that these missiles and these drones all originated from inside Iran. And on social media, there is some evidence that you can see as well. So you can see some pictures of remnants of a missile in the desert, as well as maybe even a cruise missile flying overhead as they were on their way towards Saudi Arabia. But you heard the president yesterday. He said he hasn't made a full determination yet that it is Iran behind it, but that it is pointing that way for now.
And this new evidence, though, does seem to box him into a corner a bit. Over the weekend, he was tweeting that the U.S. was locked and loaded. Then yesterday, he said the U.S. was in no rush to confront Iran. When presented with what looks like irrefutable evidence, what's the president to do?
Well, the president, there's no doubt, Aaron, that what's going on here is that tensions are high between the United States, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. This is a tense situation. The president's language kind of seems to fall back on his earlier locked and loaded, as you said, the tweet over the weekend. But again, you can be certain that U.S. officials, high senior-ranking national security officials, are discussing the next steps. One of the things that we had been told was that they wanted to make sure that Saudi Arabia took that first step. We saw that yesterday, where they just stepped short of blaming Iran directly, saying that these were Iranian weapons and that they did not originate in Yemen, but not calling out Iran directly. What they said they wanted was that they wanted international groups to come in and investigate this. They wanted the United Nations to investigate this. So if you look at Saudi Arabia's actions and you look at President Trump's actions, it seems like they want to let this play out a little longer to see where it goes. And it also gives time for the decision makers to see where things go. But at the same time, this really remains a very tense situation.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Louis, about the mood in the halls of the Pentagon where you are. Is there an active battle plan being worked out? Are we at that point?
That is always going to happen, Aaron, regardless of whether that decision is made. As we're always told here at the Pentagon, this is a planning organization. So whenever a scenario develops, there are always options that are being developed at CENTCOM, which is U.S. Central Command down in Tampa, here at the Joint Staff. And ultimately, these are options that are presented to the president, military options. But again, I've been talking to some officials. They're seeing this play out. They're being very cautious in terms of their language. They know that this is a very tense situation, and they want to make sure that right choices are made. And so, therefore, I can't tell you that there's a tension here in the building when I talk to officials, but what I do get is the feeling that, yes, they want to make sure that cautious decisions are made because there could be very long-range implications based on what actions are made.
ABC's Louis Martinez from his post at the Pentagon. Louis, our thanks to you as we continue to watch the situation unfold with Iran on the eve of the UN General Assembly. Perhaps a chance meeting between Iran's Rouhani and President Trump. We'll see. I want to turn to another day on the picket lines, though, for striking GM workers. They are in Detroit. 50,000 United Auto Workers are on the picket line again today after failed negotiations with GM. ABC's Alex Perez is there. Alex?
Hey there, I'm Alex Perez with ABC News in Detroit, Michigan, and I want you to check out the scene behind me here. Workers on the picket line here outside the GM plant. This is day 2 of the national strike. Some 50,000 employees on a strike. They say this is about better wages and better benefits and about sharing in that $8.1 billion profit that GM made last year. A lot of these employees took concessions during that 2009 government bailout. Now, both sides have been at the bargaining table around the clock since this all started, and union officials say at this point. They are nowhere near reaching a deal, but they will continue to try to hammer this out until a deal is reached. There hasn't been a strike like this one, a nationwide strike, since 2007. That's the latest on the situation in Detroit, Michigan. I'm Alex Perez. You're watching ABC News Live.
You are indeed. Alex, thanks very much. As we watch the latest unfold in Detroit, I want to turn to Atlanta next, where the Centers for Disease Control has started emergency operations to deal with the problem of vaping. And this now puts e-cigarettes on the same level as the Zika outbreak, the Flint, Michigan water crisis, and recent hurricanes. That's an indication of how seriously the CDC is now taking this. And ABC's Steve Osunsami is there with the latest. Steve.
Hello to you, Aaron. There has been yet another death associated with the use of e-cigarettes, and this time it's being reported by health officials south of Fresno, California. They're sharing very few details at this point, but say they have another vaping death, another person who was struggling to breathe who did not make it. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control here in Atlanta is getting together its best minds, activating an emergency operations center here in response to the number of people who are suffering from lung illnesses because they believe of e-cigarette product use or vaping. Their latest numbers show that 6 people so far have died across 6 states, and another 380 cases of lung illness reported across 36 states and the U.S. Virgin Islands. It is likely that this case in California will be death number 7. Health officials from coast to coast are now encouraging e-cigarette users to stop vaping while they figure out what's causing people to get sick. Aaron?
ABC's Steve Osunsami from Atlanta, where the Centers for Disease Control has begun emergency operations on vaping. A threat of a different sort to tell you about, and that's from wildfires in California. We turn to our chief meteorologist, Ginger Z, now in our weather studio.
Thank you. How about we start with the forecast and we go west first, because that's where some of the pictures of the Francis fire are coming in. This is between Provo and Salt Lake City. It was about 200 acres burned. They have had some evacuations, but they've lifted those because the cold front has passed. But before it did that, 40 to even 76-mile-per-hour wind gusts were clocked. So that is horrific fire danger and conditions for fighting them. That's going to stick around, though, ahead of that cold front. So South Utah and also into Wyoming, Rawlins is in that high wind warning for up to 65-mile-per-hour gusts today. Let's go ahead and head more tropical. There's something in the Gulf that's been trying to make itself a tropical cyclone. Even if it doesn't matter. We've already got flash flood watches posted from Texas City to Galveston, Houston, and I think those will extend north as we go into the coming days, because for the next couple of days, we're going to see this kind of trough and upper level low drop a lot of water, up to 10 inches. Even northwest of Lufkin, you see this is the European model printing out close to a foot of rain. That's a look at what's happening in Texas, but let's go to the Atlantic Ocean, where Hurricane Humberto looks so impressive on satellite, but it's only going to wrap up and get stronger. It looks like it could become a major hurricane, up to even Category 3 at one point as it passes west and northwest of Bermuda. So far enough away that it shouldn't do a lot of damage, but you've got the tropical storm watch up for some of those winds and certainly could see that really high surf. Speaking of high surf, it's getting the Atlantic all churned up, so 6 to 11-foot waves from North Carolina down the coast to Florida. So keep an eye on that. Rip currents could be dangerous, if not deadly. And how about this? That's Lake Tahoe, California. Yes, that is snow. I mean, they just stopped skiing. We saw them skiing as late as, July, and now here we are again. So it's happening. We're getting into it, but it's not happening everywhere. Certainly have that ridge in place, and it's been in place. Memphis had their first 100 in about 3 years. It was July of 2016, the last time they'd had 100 degrees before yesterday. And that was a hot one. They're going to be plenty hot again today at 98. The heat actually stretches all the way up into the northern plains ahead of that cold front. That's going to bring in some potential for severe storms going into tomorrow, which I'm sure we will tell you about.
All right, Ginger, thanks. ABC News Chief Meteorologist Ginger Z in our weather studio. Up to Capitol Hill, where Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee today are holding their first hearing as part of what they're now calling an impeachment investigation. ABC's Catherine Falders joins us from Capitol Hill now, where we're expecting to see Catherine Corey Lewandowski.
Yeah, the president's former campaign manager is scheduled to come up here later this afternoon and testify before the House Judiciary Committee. As you mentioned, this is part of hearings that they're designating now as impeachment hearings. hearings as part of their broader investigation into whether to refer articles of impeachment to the House of Representatives. But what exactly could we expect to hear from Lewandowski? Well, the White House late last night sent a letter to the committee saying that they have directed Lewandowski not to discuss any of the conversations that he had with the president or senior advisors to the president, essentially asserting privilege over those conversations, something that has Democrats up here up in arms. Chairman Nadler says that this is a, quote, shocking and dangerous assertion of executive privilege. The White House is limiting him to only speak about events that are discussed in the Mueller report, and we know that lawyers from the White House, while they probably won't speak, they will be in the audience here, Aaron.
But, Catherine, knowing Corey Lewandowski the way you do, even if he was given carte blanche to testify, how revelatory would he really be, and how useful to Democrats?
Yeah, and I think that's the question that we're also all asking, and that, frankly, a point Republicans are making here from the Mueller report, for example, that Lewandowski had a couple instances in the report. The one that stands out the most to us and is the most revelatory is the president, according to Mueller's report, directed Lewandowski to deliver a message to the former Attorney General Jeff Sessions to limit the investigation. There's a couple other references to Lewandowski in the report. We know he was a witness, but there's not much to talk about beyond that, Aaron.
Catherine, there are other White House aides and those with ties to the campaign that are supposed to testify before the Judiciary Committee, but the White House doesn't seem like they're going to let them.
Yeah, so the committee also subpoenaed the former White House Staff Secretary Rob Porter, the former Deputy Chief of Staff Rick Dearborn. They wanted those former senior White House aides to appear at the same hearing with Lewandowski today. The White House sent letters to the committee also yesterday, and they said, we're not going to let them. We're going to block them from testifying. The rationale here was that they are former senior aides to the president, and they are, in their words, immune from compelled congressional testimony. So they won't be here sitting here testifying today. Another thing that Democrats, of course, are very angry about. They don't think that they should be able to defy subpoenas, Aaron, and Republicans I talked to this morning are calling this hearing today a waste of time. They think that the committee should move on from Mueller and from Russia and focus on issues like gun control and immigration.
Don't some Democrats even agree with that? I mean, among those asking the questions of Corey Lewandowski today, Catherine, are they all for impeachment at this point?
Well, it's a good question. I think the majority of the Democrats on this committee have come out for impeachment in a sense, but I think what the Democrats have struggled with here on impeachment is their messaging. There's been many questions from Democrats, Republicans, and frankly, you and me in the media on what exactly they're doing here. Is this an impeachment investigation? Is this a formal inquiry? Is it an impeachment inquiry, as Nadler says, and as the chairman says? And he says it doesn't really matter. That's just semantics. What we're doing here is broadly investigating impeachment. So I will say, though, that Nadler, in an interview yesterday, came out in the strongest possible terms that I've heard him, where he said that he personally thinks the president should be impeached, but they're not going to move forward on that without the support of the American public.
ABC's Catherine Faulders with us from Capitol Hill. Capitol Hill, almost from birth, the very domain of our beloved colleague Cokie Roberts, who, as we've told you, has died at the age of 75 due to complications from breast cancer. We're going to leave you with a bit of Cokie now in her own words.
I was told, always a mistake, that I could talk about anything I wanted. And when I am writing something fresh, like a speech or an article or a book, I tend not to write about what I do every day, all day. But I actually decided that because I am in a school of journalism, that I would talk about women and journalism. These women were taking their places on what was supposed to be the frothy part of the newspaper and using them for serious subjects and subjects that the men were not covering. So what happened as a result of that? The newspapers got rid of the women's pages. Simple. They started calling them living, style, something where serious women's issues would not be covered. That you have to say as you go along and get to this point where you are in this wonderful institution where you have such exposure and you're learning so much and you're going out into a world where the opportunities are vast, that you have to keep pushing because we need you. We need you to be there in the journalistic world.
ABC's Cokie Roberts speaking to journalism graduates at the University of Southern California back in September of 2015. We are thinking of Cokie and her family on the occasion of her death at age 75 due to complications from breast cancer. I'm Aaron Katersky at ABC News headquarters in New York. We will continue to remember our colleague Cokie Roberts right here on ABC News Live.